All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by Cassidi Dye. Cassidi, thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we connect on Instagram. You are doing a lot for mental health for first responders and beyond. And there was actually pretty soon after I found your page, like you did a reel, or maybe I looked back on your page and you did a reel on burnout. And
Yes.
I won't tease what the different prongs or symptoms of burnout are just yet, but there was one or two that really they really hit me right in the chest. I was like,
That it-
ooh, that's not commonly recognized or discussed, and so poignant for first responders and these high drive individuals. So um, that's the teaser. But before I jump too far ahead, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about burnout. It's it's very, very common in the first responder world.
Cassidy, can we start by just giving a little introduction to yourself? I know a little bit, but I'd love for you to share with the listenership, the community, a little bit about your call to this service that you do
Yeah,
alongside and for the law enforcement community and veterans.
of course. So, yes, I am located in Kansas City and I specialize in first responders for therapy and testing, as well as coaching. So, let me backtrack a little bit. I specialize in first responders for therapy and coaching, but I also do
Hmm.
psychological testing. And
Yeah.
so for the testing piece, I specialize specifically in ADHD, personality disorders, dyslexia, autism. And then again, with the therapy and the coaching side, they're a little different. So with therapy, we like to dive into more of the past, work on diagnoses if there are any. And then coaching is more, I would say, like the here and now. There's not really diagnosing in it, but
Hmm.
it's future oriented or current as opposed to past. And so I got interested in this population. It was in my undergrad year. I had a professor who was an FBI agent, and he was encouraging me to become a police officer because
Hmm.
this population is very near to me. I grew up in a military family. Dad was a Navy SEAL, and uncles, in the Marines, Air Force, and
Yeah.
whatnot. So it's close to home. And so I went on my first ride along in my undergrad years, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And maybe it's the ADHD part of me too, like a little bit of that adrenaline rush.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I did see the need for mental health services, and there's not a
Yeah.
lot, and there's not a lot of clinicians that actually specialize in this population. So just seeing the need, and of course, the stigma around it. So that's really what got me interested, or about
Yeah.
when I got interested in it. And next thing I know, just building a community, trying to raise self awareness and just awareness in general to this population, and just, yeah, cater to that population and
Yeah.
culture. And it's important for clinicians, that I feel it's important, if you don't have the experience of being a first responder, to get involved as much as you can. And so I do go on monthly ride-alongs with different departments in the area, one, to show my face, but two, to get a better understanding of what they experience.
Hmm.
So whenever I have someone come in and say, well, what do you know? Which I understand
Hmm.
to an extent, but I
Yeah.
think it's important for clinicians to get out there too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And thank you for what you do. And thank you for all the clinicians and MHPs and advocates out there for first responder community and veterans. And it is it's not like we're more important, but it's just so nuanced and it's so specific. So that
It is.
cultural competency is so key. And that's why it's so relevant that so many people bring it up, whether it's cops, first responders, or clinicians. Um, I have shared before, hey, if you need help, like get in where you can fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, like it is a fair conversation when it's mental health specific to your first responder career and the
Mm-hmm.
traumas therein, for continued work, like it can make such a difference. And so I've talked to culturally competent law enforcement specific mental health professionals for my
Mm-hmm.
own benefit. and I've seen huge benefit for talking about the things that I've experienced in my career. I've
Mm-hmm.
also talked to a general counselor therapist for helping me grapple with my like just how do I toggle like these feelings of trying to be a good dad and a good husband in my career, because it was a little bit of that. I was like, man, I think right now what I'm really struggling with and what I'm trying to improve in is how to process all this, just kind of life stress. Um, there was a bit of it, and you kind of nodded to it, where there's not a lot of availability, and because I am frequently interacting with so many professionals in the space, I was like, I don't really need to occupy like a trauma informed first responder therapist right now. Like I would prefer to have them available for my bros and sisters,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to talk to this dude. And that talking to that dude was very beneficial for me for
Mhm.
a chunk of time. But I digress. I do want to circle back to just say thank you, and it is amazing that there are more people being vocal about that. And then I feel like there's more clinicians that are gravitating towards that because there is an increased need and awareness.
And I would say that therapeutic relationship is one of the most important things to have as well, because
Hmm.
if you can't connect with your therapist or feel seen or heard or understood, it's not going to work, And
No.
so to have a therapist or coach or whatever it may be to
Hmm.
actually understand your culture, right, and your population, it makes a world of difference. And so I also advise first responders, if it doesn't work out for the first one, if you don't feel that connection, it's okay to keep looking.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
don't give up, because I promise you there's going to be somebody out there that you're able to connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so good nod to like the competency, like riding along, becoming embedded and learning as much as you can about the community, the lifestyle, all of that. And at the same time, yes, absolutely. I think any clinician, anyone of value will say absolutely no harm, no foul. Like that's why so many people do have kind of an introductory call type of situation where they can meet and greet. And it's think about like speed dating. If you don't feel that thing, then it's like if it just feels awkward or wrong, like
Right.
let me pause. You know what I'm going to say, but I'd say for a lot of people that it is a big hump to even entertain
Mm-hmm.
talking to somebody. Recognize it might be uncomfortable, right? But
Yeah.
if there's no like kind of chemistry or opportunity there, then I think the listeners will hear what I'm saying. But I did catch myself because some people the whole notion of this is super uncomfortable. So
Right.
just try to be mindful of that. It's just so you have, I believe, was it seven key
Yeah.
indicators or
Yeah.
symptoms. So yeah, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay. Yeah. So burnout, it's, the physical, emotional, mental exhaustion caused by prolonged stress and overwork. So
Hmm.
essentially accumulated stress that we don't ever resolve. And so there's kind of like a few stages to it. So in the beginning, it's your adrenaline, your cortisol is up. So it's not a bad feeling necessarily, it's kind of a good feeling, really.
Hmm.
It can look like anxiety a little bit, but it
Hmm.
feels okay, if that makes sense. But then, like, the longer it goes on, the more your body's like, I'm getting a little bit tired here. And
Yeah.
so, your nervous system and your brain's looking for a way to kind of expel a little bit of that. And so this is where you might see, I don't know, bad behaviors a little bit. So like running late, maybe you're feeling more of the stress levels increasing, anxiety, even a little bit of frustration,
Hmm.
and then you're still not expelling it. So now we're looking at, like the more final stages. And this is going to be exhaustion, but then like burnout. And this is where you might see more of the addictions come in. So your body, or you're trying to find an escape,
Hmm.
essentially.
Okay.
And so, I mean, this could be, alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex addictions, and whatnot, and even suicidality, because you're used to operating up here with all that cortisol and that adrenaline, and after so long you might feel like there's no escape, and so this is where you might start seeing suicidal ideation and thoughts. Not sure if I can say that on here. I know, different platforms are really uncomfortable with that term. So
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's a real thing, and it's
I agree.
yeah, if it gets like shadow banned or subdued, it's lame that that's a thing because we're not promoting it. Obviously, we're doing the exact opposite, but bringing it to light because it's a very real and overwhelming issue that we need to talk about. Or how are we going to improve the
I
situation on it?
completely agree. Um, I do use the word.
You're like, but
And
from
yes,
my
I'm
experience, yeah,
currently
absolutely, yeah.
in jail on social media for utilizing
Hmm.
that word. But if I need to utilize a different word, just let me know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
No
this is
worries,
where
no worries.
about if you see it, it's going to be right about here. And so I also like to frame it like as an umbrella term for burnout. So you have like three different types of burnout, if you will. So individual burnout, this is maybe setting high standards for yourself. Then you have interpersonal burnout, and this is going to be compounding stress with an addition of a difficult coworker or maybe a boss. And then you have organiz- organizational burnout, and this is poor organizational culture or maybe extreme demands put on you. And it doesn't, you can have, a little bit of each one, or you might have one more than the other one. It just really depends.
Hmm.
But an example I can think of to kind of help explain how it works is like about 12-ish hours before your shift, you might notice increased irritability or anxiety, or maybe not, it might be subconscious. But this is your cortisol starting to build up a little bit more. And then your shift comes, so your adrenaline's up here and you're thriving, like you're doing fine at work because of the adrenaline. And then once shift's
Hmm.
over, you kind of crash because your body is used to being on high alert, right? Like as an officer,
Yeah.
you never know what's going to come next. And so naturally your body gets used to being in that state on shift. Then come off shift, you crash a little bit. And so it takes, I would say,
Hmm.
12, 24 hours to kind of come down from that. But then if you go to work the next day, like, there's just not a whole lot of time to kind of detox from the cortisol and adrenaline dump.
Yeah, it's that like hypervigilance cycle that Dr. Gilmartin talks about, right? Like how long it takes to come kind of stabilize and regulate everything, and it's usually like just barely enough of your time off if you have a full weekend and you're not taking overtime or you're not called in,
Right,
that kind of thing,
right.
right?
And so the 7 stages you were talking about, or sorry, 7 signs of burnout you were talking about. The first one, which I think is very apparent in departments, is the cynicism. So you might think in your
Hmm.
current department, that one individual who is cynical, um, has kind of a negative vibe to them a little bit, so
Yeah.
you can usually think of who that might be, and that person is probably in burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's something that resonates with everybody, for sure, and it makes sense too, right? Like you've been doing this thing, this grind, whether it's the hours or whether it's the chronic kind of problems of trying to help people that don't want help, and our hands are tied, the criminal justice system, and so yeah, it's very understandable. We need to combat it, and that's less of the conversation at this point, but yes, it's very understandable where it comes from and why it
Mm-hmm.
emerges in this way.
So another sign is going to be chronic fatigue. So your body's physically exhausted from, this adrenaline. It's from the cortisol levels and just not having, that time or that space to actually come down from it. You know,
Yeah.
it could be a mixture of things when it comes to fatigue.
Yeah, when you describe it, it makes me think of what you described earlier and kind of leading into this conversation, which is that kind of adrenaline junkie, cortisol junkie thing, right? That's so prevalent in this community where it's like go,
Yeah.
go, go. extra shift work, CrossFit workout, 2-a-days, and then you're so jacked. And I've been there. Like I liked all the high intensity things, and I just kept putting more high intensity things in a more intense way, right? Like lifting hard, sprints, all these things, and then my cortisol was through
Yeah.
the freaking roof. Like exercise is fantastic. However, like the types of exercise I was engaging in with an already extremely stressful day-to-day routine and work and working canine, like in hindsight it sounds so ridiculous I kept doing it, but it wasn't until years later I saw, I believe, a social media post, but kind of talking about like, yeah, your body thrives off of that because that is what keeps you alive. That's what keeps you high focus, and you feel that, and it becomes kind of like it has its own like dopamine response. You're like, oh yeah, I'm crushing it. I'm so alert. And meanwhile, I would just crash out. So that fatigue, right? Like literally pass out when I would roll into
Mhm.
bed. Sometimes not even ready to go to bed. And then I would get up after just a handful of hours, like wide awake, that
Yeah.
wired but tired
Right.
element,
Right.
right?
Anything in excess can be unhealthy. It can be a great
Yeah,
outlet too,
absolutely.
in moderation.
Yeah. Moderation. See, like I'm not great with moderation. I'm not a have 2 bites of ice cream and put it back like my wife. And so that does translate into a lot of me and what I need to be aware of and what I need to actively counterbalance and build, guardrails, as I say, as far as like my
Hmm.
routines in my life and knowing myself. But I know that that's also common in first responder high drive types, right? These high performers, and many of you listening in are trying to develop yourselves, and so you do fall into some of
Hmm.
these boxes. Of course, we're not all the same, but that's where I really do appreciate the lessons as you're putting them out, because it does help us recognize a lot of the why, so we can better understand ourselves and see it
Hmm.
manifest at times. Yeah. So that was number 2, right? Chronic
Yes.
fatigue.
So number three is going to
Okay.
be a
Number
loss of
3.
motivation. So finding yourself asking, what's the point? What is the purpose? You're seeing or noticing a decrease in job performance, just over time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not uncommon to see this with burnout.
It feels like they're really interconnected, right? So like if I'm cynical, I'm like, I mean, saying what's the point can be very much like we keep doing the same BS and dealing with the same
Absolutely.
person, and like society's effed, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm exhausted, and so I can see how these can build
Right.
into each other and then kind of
Mm-hmm.
overlap as
Yeah,
well.
you'll notice that with a lot of these. And then, like, co occurring
Yeah.
conditions as well. And so that's why it's
Mm-hmm.
important to kind of weed out, what's going on, to see what we're really dealing with here. But for the
Yeah.
meantime, for burnout, number four is going to be anger. That is another very popular
Mm-hmm.
one that we see with burnout. More reactive. You see individuals become more reactive.
I feel it, and so and I feel, I suppose, whether my more time on or talking about this and trying to spread this information, so actively
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn about it, but also maybe just time alive. But um, I'm not above it, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not beyond it in even having a very administrative role in my career. So I suppose what I'm trying to say was that with my time on, I feel so much more for the average line officers,
Mm-hmm.
firefighters, EMS, CEOs, like dispatchers. Like they're dealing with the grind that I don't deal with. I deal with different types of grind in
Mm-hmm.
headaches, but I can see in myself, thinking about the younger me and seeing the younger guys and gals, or just more junior guys and gals around, and dealing with what they deal with. And then at my own reflection, like my daughter does something or says something and she's being difficult, right? But she's a kid, she's a small child, and I'm the one that's like, so I
Mm-hmm.
elevate with her, right? And I'm just like, what is
Right.
going on, right? And then she starts crying. I'm like, oh man, I'm an a-hole, right? But like, just to say I get it, and I appreciate us being able to talk about anger and just be like, okay, cool, it is a sign, and like then we need to not shame or blame, but how we can take a pause and take a step back and then recognize, like in big picture and in small ways, how we can address that big B burnout, right? And we're going to get to tips and solutions at the end. So we're past the halfway point as far as like the
Mhm.
different signs. I don't want people to be like, okay, cool, check, got that. Oh, yep, that's me. Like by
Right.
midweek for sure. Okay, like this is feeling really sad. I have like 4 out of the 7. Um, so no, there is hope, and we are going to talk about tangible
Right.
tips and takeaways too.
Of course. And good for you for being open and authentic with that and experiencing and
Yeah,
having that self awareness to recognize
trying.
it.
It's easier said than done. It's better to aware when you're feeling yourself going that way. And props because I review a lot of use of force, and I mean we have a bit. I work in
Mhm.
a busy department, and my officers deal with a lot of really combative and like a hole people. Right, they're doing a hole things and they're reacting in a hole ways. But I can see so many examples where they're using very legitimate
Mhm.
justified legal force, and you can see them start to get a rise and they're just kind of restraining, like you can see it manifest in someone's body language where they're like, hey, can you take over, when the next person gets there, or they don't even have to say that, like they start their jaw
Mhm.
gets a little tense. You like see it, and then you see the next officer tap them out like right away. They're like, hey, go decompress, like they just tap them out, and then they that next officer that comes in, because they didn't have to fight them, they didn't get kicked, they're just business, right? They just holding them, they're finishing up the search, they're escorting them over to the car. So I'm like, I feel so proud because I definitely had my share of times when I was running my mouth and all that, right? Like in my younger years as an officer, and we're not immune to it, right? We do take it personally when someone's trying to hurt us and our buddies, and we do put a lot on the line. So just trying to pay a little nod to that and what that does encompass, especially for those that may not understand why the cops always look so mad on the viral video of a use
Mhm.
of force.
So, number 5, I would say, is emotional numbness. Again, very, very
Mm-hmm.
common when you experience such high levels, again, of cortisol. Eventually, you start to kind of suppress it and push down those emotions and feelings, even though they're in there somewhere,
Yeah.
but trying to push them down as much as you can so that you don't have to feel or experience anything. And so disconnecting
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes becomes a defense mechanism. And so detaching, you can see this with emotional numbness, whether it's from your spouse, from colleagues, your job, just feeling numb to everything, really.
Yeah, I think that there's like a couple versions of this that we've talked about in other episodes, but some of it, and I felt it at different times in my career where you're just so exhausted, and so you just kind of have nothing left. And sometimes you're aware,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you're not aware, right? And so, for spouses, for partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, what have you, like a lot of times it does come in as like you're checked out and you don't seem to care about anything going on here. And sometimes there's just kind of like the tank's empty. You're on fumes and like emotionally, mentally. And so those are some examples of
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen. And as far as like the circles in the career and
Yeah.
myself for sure.
For those listening, just know that they're still there, though, right? So
Mm-hmm.
dealing
Yeah.
with it, whether it's with a professional, on your own, or whatnot, you will get back to feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to need some practices, some
Absolutely.
self-care and some mindfulness and just routines to like kind of help us get back on track. And we will both spit some things, at the end of this as we rattle down the list again. And a lot of them will be addressing all or some of them all
Mm-hmm.
at once. So,
And then the sixth one is going to be isolation. You kind of see that with the emotional
hmm
numbness as well,
oh yeah.
but
hmm
distancing themselves from, again, family, colleagues, whatnot, not wanting to put themselves out there, social gatherings or anything, just the isolation. I don't want to be exposed to the world or anything around me.
Yep, and I just had a conversation with someone in the fire service. A lot of our struggles are very
Mhm.
similar. What has been taught to me and what I see manifest, and we were agreeing that it's a lot easier easier might not be the best word. It's a lot more practical to inject some wellness routines and organizational support in a
Mhm.
fire service where you're not rolling around by yourself. Like you're never a time where you're driving a fire truck or an aid car by yourself. So there's that. Um, and then you all come back to the same HQ,
Mhm.
the same department. You're eating, oftentimes you're communing together. And so there are these natural, I suppose, processes and habits where you are at least getting back together. And so if someone is intentional about some peer support or a diffusing or whatever you want to call it, checking in,
Mhm.
there is that. However, in police, it's really easy to withdraw
Right.
and isolate, and it's really hard to, and some people are like, that's all I know, right? Like some people out in small
Right.
towns, rural
Mhm.
areas, county, like you're on your own until things get really bad and you got to wait a while. So after the thing's done, you're splitting back up, you're going to your different sectors so people can get some quicker response. So that's hard, but even in a metropolitan municipality, right, where it's more busy, there's a cluster of
Mhm.
cops all around. If I don't want to be around cops, it is super easy. I will go to the calls with some other cops, and then I will splinter off, and I'll say, "Hey, I got to do this thing." Or, and if people want to track me because
Mhm.
they have in years past to follow up with
Mhm.
me or check in on me. If I don't want to, it is not hard for me to make an excuse or
Mhm.
just dodge them or
Mhm.
just not respond. I'll just go sit somewhere and do my own thing. So, um, just a nod as far as a lot of people, if they feel that in themselves, um, if they see that with a buddy, then it's like being that much more intentional and maybe some buddy check type of direct feedback. And I know we're going out of order, but like just because we're on that, I don't want to lose it. Is it says a lot if you're just like, hey, I haven't seen you in a bit. I want to check in on you. I want to make
Mhm.
sure you're okay. Something as direct as that, or I
Right.
worry about you, man.
Or just noticing what they're
Okay,
experiencing, or going through, because not everybody has that self awareness. And not only just self awareness, but what happens is you almost become immune to it. You might not even realize what it is that you're going through, especially if you're having that mental
hmm
fog, if you're isolating, you're having that numbness, you might not be in tune with how you're even feeling. So to have a friend or a buddy recognize that in you can help you to open your eyes up a little bit.
all right. I think we got to number 7.
Increased risky behaviors. This could be
Mm-hmm.
consciously or unconsciously to seek excitement. And this could be substance
Yeah.
use, it can be unnecessary risks, on or off duty. You might see an increase in aggression, so more quote unquote bar fights, just trying
hmm
to seek that stimulation or excitement.
Yeah, and that's an uncomfortable one. I did an article where that became a prong and talking about grappling with some of the stuff for Police One, and it's just this notion that um, that if we sit back and we just observe, and it's not to like just assign this to somebody, but for sure there is this kind of like flirting with disaster, and if you have this numbness that we talked about earlier a lot, and you have this cortisol running so freaking high all the time, there is this. I don't really feel anything until I feel like a lot. Like I need a lot to feel something, and so that is where I've had it described to me where people do they flirt, like literally romantically flirt, but then also like they
Right.
flirt with disaster and they push it. They drive faster than they
Mm-hmm.
know they ought to, and it becomes habitual. It might be gradual, right? And then it also could be, I'm a pretty clever, funny guy. I'm gonna see what I can
Mm-hmm.
get away. Like I'm gonna ride that little wave of how much can I say and kind of talk crap to somebody without it actually being a full on. You transcribe it and just the words. Well, that wasn't an insult, but it was how I said it and how snarky I was. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there, so I'm speaking from a place of knowledge, not
Right.
condemnation.
So those are the main 7 things I would say to look inwards a little bit and see if you're experiencing any of those. And if so, yes, just
hmm
knowing that, yes, it's okay. Like, it's common. It's not unusual to experience this, but it's what do we do about it is the important part.
Yeah.
How to prevent it, or if you're already experiencing, more of these symptoms than not. How do we fix it?
Absolutely. And that's where we could go probably for hours on like how to fix it and these different mechanisms to address it and start to fine tune this. Really, there's so many episodes that may not be specifically about wellness on the show and beyond, right? Where really just any way that we can help our emotional regulation and our health in general is a lot of what we can do. What are some things that jump out at you as we talk about? I mean, we talked about the interrelatedness of a lot of these and kind of
Mhm.
illustrated that, but what are some things that are the lower hanging fruit for you that you like to start with?
So the basic skills of getting, adequate sleep, good sleep
Mm,
hygiene, rest, your mind and body are so interconnected, and we
yeah.
know this. And so if you're not getting adequate sleep, your mental health is not going to be doing well. And vice versa, right? So if you're super depressed or you're having a lot of anxiety, chances are you're not getting good sleep anyway. So your body needs that mental and physical recovery. And
Hmm.
so, again, we know being a police officer, first responder, a lot of times it's hard with the shift work and schedules and getting adequate sleep, but you really do need to prioritize this. And that goes along with a healthy diet too, healthier, right? 80, 20%.
Yeah, I love it.
Focusing on what you can do just to better fuel your body and, you know, start small. I like to say 1% each day. How can you make yourself 1% better each day? And if
Hmm.
that's eating an apple and you're not used to eating fruit, then so be it. But just starting somewhere to fuel your body and your mind.
I mean, I love that you started with sleep. The younger me would say no. The younger me always went to hit the gym, hit the weights, and for
Yeah.
those bros and broettes out there that are like, no, you gotta. I do support that, but it starts with sleep because I heard it from. I want to say it's like Mark Bell, this top tier power lifter at a point, and he talks a lot about his own lessons learned and deep dive into things health and fitness, but no, actually, he was quoting somebody else. It might have been. I'm gonna super nerd out on this bro culture stuff. It might have been Stan Efferding, but I think he said skipping legit sleep when you need it and going to the gym for that when you still actually really needed hours of sleep is like stepping over dollars to pick up nickels, something to that effect. So that really resonated with me because, as I explained, with that high cortisol lifestyle, that's exactly what I was doing, and I was just making matters extremely way worse, right? Just dysregulate
Mhm.
hormones and all of that. So
Mhm.
I love that you start with sleep, and that 1% better is no joke, right? Like just start small, start the tiny habits. There's a book called Tiny Habits, but
Mhm.
starting there and then just really recognizing that that's how you're going to build some traction, and that's going to become your newer normal. And the
Mhm.
80-22, right? We talked about the extremity of personalities in this career, so just allowing some wiggle room, like 80-20,
Mhm.
will get you most of the way there, whether it's sleep habits, whether it's nutrition, whether it's fitness. So yeah, I love all that.
Yeah. The other one I like to add is exercise in whatever form, right?
Hmm.
We talked about too much in excess is obviously unhealthy. So don't do it in excess. But
Yeah.
as simple as walking, if you have a treadmill, walk outside, walk at the gym, wherever it may be, lift some weights if you want to. Just getting your body moving in some sort of way because we know that decreases cortisol. And if we're on burnout, our cortisol's up here. So
Hmm.
anything to bring that down a little bit and then increasing oxygen into our cells, and like you were saying, it is a social outlet for a lot of first responders. You see a lot of these, nonprofits and these groups on social media formulating a group of first responders to, exercise. And as humans, we like to feel connected to others. And so it helps to build connections as well.
I love that, and especially coming off the heels of like, well, don't work out too hard. So let's not do nothing. Let's do something. And the walking is the greatest low hanging fruit example, right? Because it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be, oh man, like I'm not a great runner and it's hard on my knees. Like, okay, cool. Like do what you can. But even if you are one of those, again, hard chargers where every moment has to be productive, and if you're going to work out, you're going to do your damnedest to work out as hard as you can. Um, some things that I've employed that have worked for me and continue to work for me is, if I slept like garbage, I already wake up with the recognition, or the middle of the night where I'm getting up and I'm like not sleeping, and I get up and I try to do something different, and it's like 3 a.m. That's how I'm starting my day. Then I'm like, you are not working out hard, and I make that rule for myself, and it's served me well in the last few years as I generally have better sleep than, especially than I did before. But it's always a work in progress, right? So you're not working out hard. You are taking the dogs out on a walk. You are spending time in nature, whatever that thing is. And then another tip is, if you want to do some exercise, like focus on nasal breathing and just focus on like restorative breath. And
Mm-hmm.
it almost, I mean, man, it's such an amazing way of regulating what your output is, because if I'm only going to breathe through my nose at a pretty calm rate, I can't go running fast. Like I just can't, it's just, if it starts to huff and puff, then you're like, you're pushing it, you're cheating. Like, no, bring it back, because that's what you need.
Do something, whatever that is. Just get your body moving a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the work-life balance, utilizing your PTO, sick time, and whatnot. Take time off from work. You know, your job is not your only identity. You need to have a life outside of your work. And rather it's different hobbies, if it's, spending more time with your family, going on vacations, if it's going in your backyard and gardening, whatever it is, you need to have a life outside of your job too,
Mm-hmm.
or at least maybe a different set of friends outside of work. But just investing in your mental health and having a good work-life balance.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think for those that any prong of this, if you're like, man, I can't do that, or if you feel yourself like building that anxiety or that tension with that idea, then listen to that. Don't push through in an unhealthy way, but it might be a good sign that you should question and stay curious, like whether it is something you could really benefit from, right? So in the example of like, if taking pause and like just going walking or taking a moment to try meditating, if you're like, there's no way I can do that, then maybe you need it. Maybe you need it more. If interacting with a social circle of your spouse, or getting together at a family function sounds like the worst thing in the world, then maybe you need it. Maybe you are cynical. Maybe you're so detached and isolated that, I definitely have had a handful of times where I didn't want to do something. I'm like, again, it's part of the flip is recognizing that we grow in discomfort, and this comes off a lot of other conversations I've had recently with fantastic guests. But if we can program ourselves to recognize there's a benefit here, and
Mm-hmm.
then wire ourselves to, um, basically like wire ourselves to get that dopamine response from, oh, I'm doing something hard, good for me. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to be here, but I'm here. Okay, this isn't that bad. Good for me. Good job. Good job, Eric. You're not a total recluse, a hermit, right? Because I have had those times. I had those times where I didn't want to go see my old buddies, but I'm like, why do I not want to see my old buddies? Just go, and you can leave. And and generally, I don't leave early. It's just great, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I do encourage people to do that, because it has to be intentional. You have to sometimes just push yourself into that place of discomfort.
And so I have two more things I think that would be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of them is incorporating more self-care, mindfulness, kind of grounding techniques to kind of
Yeah.
bring you to the here and now. Because I think a lot of times we get lost in the future or the past and we're just not grounded, and it's like working a muscle, right? So the more you do it, the better it gets. And at
Mm-hmm.
first, it might be uncomfortable, it might be hard, you might not understand it, but with time, you're going to start to notice the effects from it, the positive effects from it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it will get easier.
Yeah, really well said. What are some of those grounding things? And I want to be mindful of time, but in case people are like, okay, like I'm open to that. Like, what does that look like?
One way to do it is to obviously do some deep breathing. I like 5, 6, 7 breathing. So you breathe in for 5 seconds, hold it for 6 seconds, and then breathe out for 7 seconds.
Okay.
Honestly, if you can do it longer, try to do it longer, the exhale and as well as the inhale. So I don't know if I'd go by 5, 6, 7 now that I'm saying it. So I know a lot of people say the box breathing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, yes, if that's starting out, but I think what's more beneficial is really inhaling as deep as you can,
Mm-hmm.
right? And holding it as long as you can, and then exhaling as long as
Yeah,
you can, but do it repeatedly. Don't just do it
yeah.
once or twice, but do it 10 times, 20
Mm-hmm.
times, until you feel that effect from it. Another one is just kind of looking at your surroundings and naming the things that you see. Another one is progressive muscle relaxation. So clenching each muscle group one at a time as hard as you can and then releasing. So ideally, as soon as you go through your whole body, you feel more relaxed.
Those are good. I'll cut in because the breath work is legit, and it's something that I've, like anything else, there's times where I've been better about it, and there's times that I need to pick it back up. Yeah, box breathing is something that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have heard in academy, and yeah, I like the fact that there are so many different options and modalities. The fact is, if you try something and you start working on it, essentially when we're stressed, what we don't do is we don't breathe, right? Like we're just kind of in this panic mode. It could be the inbox, it could be the routine patrol calls where you're just not actively breathing, and you get the most oxygen through nasal breathing. And
Correct.
so, if you're huffing and puffing because you're stressed or you're out of shape or what have you, like that's just going to compound. So slowing down, and as Cassidy says, like, or maybe my twist to it, and I want to see what you think, but yes, work on a longer breath holds, but not so you're like gasping. You're not trying to set a record, but you're trying to regulate, and you will feel it. You will feel it if you actually do that
Mm-hmm.
exercise. Fun tip: I actually had some sleep apnea issues, which was super uncommon. Like you go to the sleep doc, you do I did the overnight clinic years and years ago in my early 20s, and he was just like, well, I don't know, you're not overweight or out of shape, so I really don't know why you should
Yeah.
even have sleep apnea. But he did say I had mild sleep apnea. It wasn't until years later that that bringing that up actually, and seeing some signs of it, that my naturopath doc was like, well, one thing that, oh, here's what it was: I was waking up and kind of feeling like out of breath, which people might be like, WTF, like how is that? But rather than go down that
Mm-hmm.
rabbit hole, what he suggested was, by working on breath holds, my natural sleep apnea, where I don't breathe for chunks of time, and it is apparently decently natural, but at the point that it was waking me up, clearly not. But his thought was, it was not so big to need a CPAP or anything, but he suggested that and this is not medical advice for you, but I work on breath hold so that my body was not more attuned to it, and then I would just not wake up. It was just more normal for me to not breathe for like 8 seconds. And yeah, I noticed an improvement. So there you go. If you work on breath holds, there's so much science on it, and just kind of regulation, nervous system regulation. It won't hurt. And if you think about, if any of this sounds woo to you,
Right.
and I've said this before, think about whether oxygen is important for your brain function and your muscular, your
Mm-hmm.
structure, your every system, and everyone would say yes, it is. It's like, okay, cool. If you want sharp brain, sharp cognitive skills, and you want your athletic abilities primed for this job you do, should you work on breathing better? And I think every responsible person would say yes. Okay, it's not woo. It's, I'll work on breathing better. So sorry for that little diatribe.
No, I think it's useful. And, kind of going back to letting individuals know not to hold it too much till you pass out. I agree. Do not do that. But this
Only
kind of
because we're
goes,
cops. We're cops and we're gonna do it. We're like, oh, she said as long
I
as
know
I
to go
could.
in your
Yeah,
face. No, no, no.
yeah.
This also goes with being in tune with your own body and listening to it, right? So you will know when to kind of release.
Mm-hmm.
You will feel that. And so just be in tune with yourself. And yes, do not go too long to where you're about to faint.
Yeah,
Listen to your body. And if
yeah.
the box breathing, the 4x4. If it helps you, like start with that. But you want to get to a point where you're able to hold it in a little bit longer and really exhale. And there's science behind the double like take. So like you
Oh
breathe
yeah.
in
Mm-hmm.
and then breathe in a little bit more and then
Yeah.
hold it and
Yeah, I've heard
exhale.
that too.
Yeah. So there's so many different techniques when it comes to just breathing. So give it a try.
Yeah.
Any of them,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I think a Huberman like put that out as far as like the inhale, the double inhale, then exhale.
Mhm.
And shoot, like if people are looking for resources, he talks a lot about sleep. Dr. Matthew Walker talks a ton about sleep and how it actually detoxes your brain. And so when you think about that, you're like, ooh, I want to desludge my brain. And so the whole like, yeah, I'll sleep later, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, yeah, that's true. And you'll probably die sooner. So
Right.
let's fix our sleep, first responders, um, and corporate warriors, whoever you are. And then I love the example of relaxing your muscles. I haven't tried that, and I'll
Mhm.
have to next time. I'm like kind of anxious and pent up.
Mhm.
But I'm familiar with yoga nidra, which like a lot of times the guided meditation,
Mhm.
it can be like sleep mimicking, or some people fall asleep doing
Yeah.
it. And I have before, but recently I like woke up way too early, and so I put on a yoga nidra track, and I actually felt like I felt anxiety of trying to focus on the different body parts, because basically for listeners, um, usually it's starting from kind of the top, or like a hand or something, like, yeah, relax your right thumb, relax your right index finger, and then they progress on. But I felt like since I wasn't ready to move on to the next thing, I started feeling like I was behind.
Mhm.
So that was making me stressed. Um, but essentially it's walking you through relaxing your whole body, so you just actually feel that like sinking into your bed
Mhm.
or whatever.
Mhm.
So again, I have had positive experiences at times. This is not something I regularly do, but I like the example that you gave, and I'll have to try to remember to do that, is like clenching and then feeling that relaxation. Because as you explained it, and now I'm doing it like with my hands and my fists, I'm like, yeah, naturally you feel that dramatic
Right.
release, and then you
Right.
kind of just let that ride. So that's cool.
Right.
I never heard of that.
Honestly, it doesn't matter where you start, like your hands or your feet, but
Hmm.
essentially you go through every muscle group.
And for the bros and broettes, that's isometric tension.
Yeah.
There's schools of bodybuilders that love that kind of thing. That's like a Bruce Lee thing too, to like just flex and hold, and fight through that. So, oh man, okay. Well, Cassidy, um, we could nerd out on this for a long time. I appreciate the crash course of not only just the lead up to this burnout that we see, your background in the all these different these facets, these seven prongs, but also these
Mhm.
tangible takeaways, and how we can address a lot of these overlapping interrelated prongs. Um, is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with? And then please do also tell us where we can find you, how people can reach out. As you mentioned, you're a coach, and so if you're not in Cassidy's region in Kansas, you can absolutely access her and her help through coaching. So yeah, please.
I kind of talked about this, but I just want to reiterate, if you have been to a therapist or coach and you didn't feel that connection in the beginning, keep on going. I want you to keep looking, because I
Mm,
promise you there's going to be someone out there that you can connect with. And also knowing that there's alternatives or other clinicians out there aside from just your EAP therapist.
mhm.
There's other individual clinicians, there's, coaches that specialize in first responders. So there's help out there. Just utilize these utilize these clinicians, utilize these resources that are out there. Social media is getting really popular with offering these. So just utilize it. It's not too late, it's not too early. Just reach out. And if you do want to reach out to me, you can go to my Instagram page. It's at cassidydye.lmlp. I have on there is my website, my contact information, or in the subtitles of here, I can always link that information down there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I hope this was helpful to the
Yeah,
listeners.
absolutely, it was. I'm confident, and I got so much from it, so I know they did too.
Well, thank you.